Listen to the My Life of Crime podcast with me, Erin Moriarty.
Speaker Johnson will meet with former President Trump tomorrow.
And very much for life and for everybody getting an opportunity.
We've gone backwards. People like 20, 30 years ago had more rights than we do.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. As former President Donald Trump spends time on the campaign trail and in the courtroom, he's having an impact on Capitol Hill as well. Speaker Mike Johnson is meeting with the presumptive Republican nominee at Mar-a-Lago in Florida tomorrow. Conservative lawmakers, amid all of this, have helped block a national security surveillance bill that came yesterday after Trump came out against it. All of this happening as Johnson faces the real threat of getting ousted, just like his predecessor. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us now from Capitol Hill. Nicole, thank you for being here and sharing your reporting. What do you believe as a reporter? What's your assessment about Johnson's meeting with Trump tomorrow and what it could mean, especially for House Republicans and the legislative agenda?
Well, obviously, this comes at a very significant and potentially perilous time for the Speaker. It comes as no surprise that Speaker Johnson has maintained a close relationship with the former president, so his visit is not necessarily unusual in that sense, but is more unusual in the sense of timing because, as you just alluded to, there is this threat of a motion to vacate, potentially to oust him as Speaker by another close Trump ally, Marjorie Taylor Greene of Florida. So while we do know this announcement with the former president and the Speaker is expected to focus on election integrity issues, at the same time, the optics of the two men standing together politically could be an attempt also to try to send a signal to fellow Republicans to try to rally around the Speaker or to present a united front on the part of the former president and the Speaker.
Yes, this event on Friday is being billed as a so-called election integrity event. Trump, of course, continues to deny that President Biden fairly won the 2020 election and falsely claimed that the election was stolen from him. Meanwhile, Trump continues to exert influence over House Republicans. Nicole, what have you learned about how Trump's opposition to an extension of FISA, the surveillance legislation, has influenced House Republicans?
Well, we did see this week some 19 House Republicans block that bill, which would have reauthorized, and technically it was the rule that would have allowed the bill to be taken up for consideration, but essentially blocking this bill that would reauthorize the government's warrantless surveillance program. But that being said, it is not stopping the Speaker and Republican leadership from trying to move forward, even as the former president has suggested killing the bill. We are learning late this evening that it's possible that the House will try to make another attempt to try to bring this FISA legislation up, potentially looking at shortening the reauthorization period from 5 years to 2 years potentially. There has been talk of another rules meeting in the near future, and that the House could again try to bring this up before the end of the week.
The Japanese Prime Minister in Washington. Let's listen for a moment about what he had to say.
As we meet here today, I detect an undercurrent of self-doubt among some Americans about what your role in the world should be.
With respect to the Japanese Prime Minister, as a reporter, I would not characterize it as an undercurrent of self-doubt. There's, in fact, a raging debate between both of the parties about the United States and its role in the world. One of the key issues on that front, Nicole, as you know well, is whether to have an extension of funding for Ukraine in its war against Russia. Where does that stand right now in Congress?
Yeah, well, I think that was perhaps what was most striking about the prime minister's comments to Congress earlier today. Certainly, while he did talk at length about the strong alliance between the United States and Japan, he did spend a lot of time talking about some of those global threats around the world, not only in the Indo-Pacific, but also with respect to Ukraine, talking about how Japan has supported Ukraine in its war against Russia, and also questioning what might happen if the U.S. doesn't support Ukraine campaign. So again, this all coming at a very critical time as Speaker Johnson also has to make a decision about whether or not to bring that supplemental legislation to the floor.
A lot of decisions for Speaker Johnson as he heads to Florida. Nicole Killian, thank you.
You bet.
President Biden's campaign launched a 7-figure ad buy in Arizona focused on abortion rights. The battleground state is grappling with the fallout of the state's Supreme Court upholding a near total ban. In the ad, the president criticizes former President Donald Trump's abortion stance. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang joins us now from the White House. Weijia, this is an indicator perhaps of how this White House and the Biden campaign are laser focused on abortion rights, especially in the wake of Arizona.
And Bob, we have seen this time and time again from the Biden campaign. It's almost like they're locked and loaded and ready to go anytime there's a development on the issue of abortion. This is the second targeted ad about abortion from the campaign that is also 7 figures. So was the first one that dropped. They were ready when Donald Trump made his comments about abortion by increasing ad spending, and then the White House announcing that the vice president would actually go to Arizona tomorrow to talk about reproductive freedoms. And now you have this brand new ad, really all of it part of an effort to remind voters what's at stake in their words here, because even though Trump has tried to distance himself from this very controversial issue by saying it should really be up to the states, these ads, as well as every chance they get to talk about it, are trying to remind voters of why we are in this position in the first place, which is because, of course, the reversal of Roe v. Wade. And Trump continues to take ownership of that and talks about how proud he is for his part in making that happen, which, of course, is because he appointed 3 conservative justices to the Supreme Court that ultimately made that ruling.
For those of you who haven't seen it, let's take a quick listen to the ad.
The question is, if Donald Trump gets back in power, what freedom will you lose next? Your body and your decisions belong to you, not the government, not Donald Trump. I will fight like hell to get your freedom back.
Weijia, beyond this ad itself, what we heard in this ad and in so many things from the Biden side is Trump's name. We keep hearing Trump's name. They're going right at former President Donald Trump, citing him as a real threat, perhaps existential to American democracy. What are you hearing from your sources about why they're using his name, why they're coming right at him rhetorically and in these advertisements?
Well, for the first couple years of his presidency, Robert, this President Biden was very hesitant to even talk about Donald Trump. And he wouldn't mention him by name, to your point. He would just say the former guy or my predecessor. But now that Trump is the presumptive nominee and it has become crystal clear that this is the race, they have no qualms about going after Trump. In fact, you may remember, it was during a high-profile campaign event a couple months ago where President Biden really did this for the first time. And you could see that he was fired up. You could see that he wasn't holding back. And I think we should expect more of the same moving forward, because sources at the campaign have made very clear that they think once people start to realize that this is going to be the matchup and the ticket and that voters start paying attention, because right now they might think that Trump is not actually going to be on the ballot for a variety of reasons. They believe once people really understand that it will be a much easier choice that will give Biden an edge, which is why they're trying to say Trump's name as much as possible.
Weijia Jiang, as ever, thank you for your time and your reporting. Jury selection in Donald Trump's hush money trial is set to begin on Monday in New York. Coming up next, we'll discuss the biggest question marks around that trial. You're streaming America Decides.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
Does this carrier strike group stand ready?
Just incredible to see there's an active search and rescue operation going on 12 hours after this accident.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Stories start with the who, what, when, and where. But it's why it's important to you that matters most. Knowing what to ask is how you open the door to a deeper understanding. See you on Primetime, streaming free everywhere.
An original documentary from CBS reports
that Desired Farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
I shouldn't have a trial. This is not a trial. This is not an act of criminality.
These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct.
Welcome back to America Decides. An 11th hour request by former President Donald Trump to delay his hush money trial was rejected by an appellate judge earlier this week. Jury selection is set to begin on Monday. Let's bring in CBS News legal analyst Ricky Kleeman. Ricky, you are on top of so many legal issues, but as we look ahead to former President Donald Trump's criminal trial that is set to begin sometime in the coming weeks, jury selection begins next week. What is on your radar? What are you watching?
I think you have to simultaneously watch for how the jurors are selected or perhaps deselected, and I can explain that, and look at the other motions that will continue to be filed by Donald Trump's legal team, even while jury selection is happening. In terms of what kind of jurors does each side want, we can only deal with stereotypes, Bob. What we really have is looking at the defense, which is going to want the usual juror that a prosecution wants, and the prosecution is going to want the usual juror that a defense wants in the stereotypical assessment.
When you look at this jury process in New York, how long do you expect it could last? A few days or a few weeks?
It should really last, to be thorough, it should really last a few weeks. What you are dealing with here, when I say the process is a deselection, because you will get a pool of jurors that at least pass the scrutiny of both sides, and from that pool, once the others are whittled away, then they are long gone. From the pool that remains, they will have to strike jurors. or prospective jurors. So let's say that what the prosecution is looking for are highly educated, highly thoughtful people who will want to go sift through the evidence and understand about business records, understand ultimately about election law. They want the most intelligent jury. The defense, on the other hand, is going to be looking for people who are the quote-unquote kind of people who might be sympathetic to former President Trump. So that's often switched the other way. What we say when we say we're looking for a fair and impartial jury, what we're really looking for are the least partial jurors, because ultimately there is no one who is going to enter that courthouse on Monday who doesn't have an opinion about Donald Trump, one way or the other. So they can raise their right hand. They can say that they can cast aside their feelings, they can cast aside their beliefs, they can cast aside everything they've read, and they can be fair and impartial. But what if they're stealth jurors? What if they're people who want to get on this jury in order to vote the other way? What if they're stealth jurors who ultimately want to write a book? This is a difficult sifting process, and the judge is well advised to take a long time with each individual juror in order to try to get to the bottom of what they really believe. This should not happen in a few days. If it does, there's something wrong.
Stealth jurors, it sounds like a book you could write if you ever had free time to do so. When you look at this trial, Ricky, former President Trump, you mentioned, might put forward through his lawyers many motions in the coming weeks. Is there any particular motion you're watching for?
Yes. I'm watching for not only the filing, but the ultimate, not only for the filing, but for the ultimate review yet again of the motion for a change of venue. And I'm certainly expecting a motion for prejudicial pretrial publicity to get rid of the case. And the only way that that can be done, either one, venue or pretrial publicity, the only way that that could be successful is if the jurors themselves who come into the room, that you can't find a fair and impartial jury, that the vast majority of those who fill out the questionnaire and come to court say that they either favor Donald Trump or they want to prosecute Donald Trump, that they voted for Donald Trump and they believe in everything he says, or they voted against Donald Trump and they don't believe anything he says. So there comes a point where it is possible to say that the venue is improper.
And finally, Ricky, before you go, any reflections on the death of O.J. Simpson as someone who has covered him and that historic murder trial and acquittal for many decades now?
I think that the O.J. Simpson case cannot be compared realistically to the prosecution of the people of the state of New York versus Donald Trump. There were so many issues in the Simpson case that had to do with the Los Angeles Police Department and its fractured relationship with the Black community, and that those cultural differences between the police culture and the African American community's culture really left the situation of people being skeptical of the prosecution. In terms of Donald Trump, if you want to make a comparison, Donald Trump has used his bully pulpit, his megaphone, to be able to say that all of these prosecutions are politically motivated. So the question then, by comparison, if there is one, is are there enough people who believe that the Justice Department federally, as well as local DAs, have become part of this weaponization to become part of election interference, to quote Donald Trump, to keep him from winning this new election, not the 2020 election. but the 2024 election. So you can have a lot of biases on both sides, but that is where I would leave that comparison.
Ricky Kleeman, as ever, thank you for your analysis and your collegiality. We appreciate it.
That's all right. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Always great to be with Ricky. Well, House Speaker Mike Johnson's meeting with former President Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene's efforts to oust him. We'll unpack that with our panel. That's coming up next. You're streaming America Decides.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team. Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate. Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am. This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
This is CBS.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He is the Republican leader, that he is the leader of the opposition party against the Biden administration, and we expect him to lead that way, not to pass the Biden administration's agenda.
Welcome back to America Decides. As we covered earlier in the program, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is continuing to publicly question if Speaker Mike Johnson is fit for his job. So let's bring in our political panel, Olivier Knox and Kadia Goba. Olivier is a longtime national political correspondent. Kadia is a political reporter for Semaphore. Great to have both of you here at the table. Let's begin with you, Olivier. Speaker Johnson, he's appearing with Trump. Is that going to be enough to satiate the right flank in the House GOP?
No, I don't think it is. There have been complaints from the right flank of the House GOP that they're not getting enough of their own agenda through a House that they recaptured. You've heard public angst from some of their leading figures. Marjorie Taylor Greene is one, of course, but Chip Roy, for example, has complained about the lack of a Republican agenda moving forward. It will not be enough unless, of course, Donald Trump changes his mind. This is the man who can change the course of actions and events in the House of Representatives with a simple social media post.
Kadia, when you cover Speaker Johnson, which you do frequently, do you see someone who's really in danger of losing the gavel?
I think it depends, but I don't think Marjorie Taylor Greene has a lot of the support that she would need. Democrats have been very outright saying that they would support a motion to vacate measure. They've also said they would vote to table. So I'm not quite sure that she has the support that would, oust another speaker. I also think Republicans are a little annoyed and uneasy about going back to their constituents and asking for another 2 years when the dysfunction has been so incredible. So I'm not sure that's going to be a winning message going into November for House Republicans.
And Khadija, another issue some Republicans are uneasy about in election 2024 is abortion rights. What is that issue doing in terms of shaping how Republicans are talking about the issue, how former President Trump is talking about the issue? What are you watching on that front?
Well, definitely the Senate race in Arizona. We saw Carrie Lake do an incredible flip-flop the other day, saying that she opposes this measure that the Arizona House just passed, but at the same time had lauded the measure about 2 years ago. So I think the abortion issue is going to be front and center. Republicans are going to be very uneasy and very uncomfortable talking about it. They don't coalesce around any, they haven't acquiesced or talked about any message that they can talk about all fluidly together, and sadly. And I think it's going to impact whether or not, the big question is whether or not people with these abortion measures on the ballot, whether or not they're going to go in and vote for the measures and then split and vote for the Republican person on the ticket. That is what I'm really looking for, to see whether or not that changes anything, all these ballot measures that are out there in support of abortion.
So some Republicans, Olivier, might be uneasy about it, but former Vice President Mike Pence and others have criticized Trump for not supporting Senator Lindsey Graham and his push for a federal ban on abortion with a certain number of weeks included in that legislation. Does Trump have any risk of losing some of his evangelical support, Christian voter support, and others who oppose abortion rights by taking this more vague position on abortion?
I think it's a great question. I mean, obviously, one of the smartest things that the Trump campaign in 2016 did was put his name behind a list of conservative judges that he would consider naming to federal judgeships, including the Supreme Court. That was very helpful in locking down evangelical support. I think that what Mike Pence's comments show also is that there's a not inconsiderable number of conservatives and Republicans who are fine doing badly in a couple of midterm elections, maybe even a couple of special elections, as long as they can keep this significant once-in-a-generation victory. I mean, this has been a campaign issue and a principle for these folks since Roe versus Wade was decided by the Supreme Court in the early 70s. Whether he would lose his evangelical support, they've gone through an awful lot and still support him. I don't know that this is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
As we look ahead to next week, Trump's trial in New York is set to begin with jury selection. Most Republican voters I meet on the campaign trail seem to be tuning out most of Trump's legal challenges, but he could still be facing 6 to 7 to 8, 9 weeks in court in New York. What does that mean for the Trump campaign?
Well, I think it makes it difficult for a person going to trial to be on the campaign rallying like Trump usually does. I think this changes the dynamic of what we'll see. It won't be the same thing we saw in 2020. I think they'll be very isolated. I think they'll have to be more targeted. I think they'll have to put a lot of their focus on Black and Latino voters, which they've been trying to ramp up for a while. I think it does considerably change the campaign in a big way.
And very quickly, Annie, how do you see it?
That's the main effect, I think. And I don't think they've been tuning out his legal problems because they seem to be very responsive to fundraising requests. When he puts out, I'm under attack, there's a partisan prosecutor coming after me, please give $25. So they are responding to that. So what they are doing, though, is they're saying it's not going to dent their support for the former president.
It's a lot to watch in the coming weeks. You have the Speaker of the House going to Florida on Friday, Trump going to New York. He's going to Pennsylvania first for a fundraiser and rally over the weekend, then who knows how long in New York. So many issues in this campaign. So glad we could have both of you, Khadija Goba and Olivier Knox, joining us here at the table for America Decides. Hope you come back soon. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. And that does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow. That's at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices